Okay, let me give you the rundown on The Blood of the Vampire by Francis Marryat, published in the same year that Dracula was by Bram Stoker, 1897. It's a supposed Gothic novel where the main character, Harriet Brandt, having reached adulthood, leaving the convent where she was raised when her father's plantation and her father himself and her mother were killed, has left that and has ended up in Europe, in Heist, Belgium, and disastrously comes into contact with a group of British tourists and travels with some of them back to London, where more kind of, not mayhem, more tragedy ensues. It's a book in two halves, yes. The first half being in Heist. It's sort of basically the worst vacation ever, with the worst, most annoying people ever. Yes, the main bunch of the British tourists is centering around Margaret Pullen, who has her young baby Ethel with her, and is accompanied by her soon-to-be sister-in-law, Eleanor Layton, who is engaged to a rather vain brother-in-law to Margaret Pullen, Ralph Pullen. They come into contact with, as you often do on vacations, a rather coarse baroness who is married. She is actually probably of lower class British origins, who's hooked up with a German baron and have gone into and are in the boot and cap trade. I think it's mostly boots, selling boots trade, and is not shy about it. She's extremely coarse, extremely bullying. She bullies her son, completely wimpy, emasculated Bobby. Yes, Ralph, the fiance, comes on the scene, and he ends up getting kind of ensnared by Harriet, who none of the women in this book seem to notice that she is a smoking hottie whose passions just ensnare them in. But boy, all the men are attracted to her like moths to that flame. And yeah, it does not go well there. They all end up back in London, and we get an introduction of one of the more interesting characters. I don't know, interesting, but a bit of relief from the kind of unending dreariness of most of the characters in this book. Anthony Pennell, who is an author of great books, very popular, very religious. That does seem to be a kind of a constant theme in literature of this time, or not literature, but like what was popular at the time was very much kind of Christian, what it seems like Christian sentimentality. Actually, he gets described as a bit of a socialist, but this is 1897 socialist, so it's still very Christian socialism, very much wanting to raise people up, and is very selfless, and indeed starts in a relationship with Harriet, which is actually kind of more that way. Now, I call this book a supposed Gothic novel because it's really more of a drawing room melodrama than it is with characters I did not care about, rather than Dracula, which I read fairly recently, which is, it's an adventure novel, and there's action scenes. Like, this is all stuff of people bitching at people in drawing rooms, and you don't really care about these characters at all. Margaret is nice, but she's a bit of kind of milquetoast that way. Eleanor is a super bitchy snob, but not in the most fun way. She's very much a cold fish, which is one of the reasons why that the vain, egotistical Ralph Pullen is so easily lured away by Harriet. Harriet herself, so, I don't know, spoilers. She is of mixed race. She has what sound like incredibly terrible parents, both of whom were sadists, and the father was a scientist who practiced vivisection and was tossed out of even like kind of the worst scientific circles in Europe. ended up in Jamaica. We get all this delivered by Dr. Phillips, who is sort of the Van Helsing of the book, but he's like he's a puffed up blowhard who just delivers kind of like, his racist tirades, and the book seems to adopt them. So he relates that, yes, that her father was this horrible vivisectionist who went to Jamaica, set up a plantation, and started experimenting on the black servants there. Her mother was a fat, overweight woman of mixed race. They of course use other terms. Actually, one of the introductions with Harriet at the beginning is her using the N-word all over the place at the beginning. It's interesting. There's a big dose at the beginning where she's talking about the black people in Jamaica, and she's not saying black people. She is saying all the racial epithets, and you're just like, oh, this is gross. But yeah, her gross mother, who seems to have been into vampire bats as well. So Dr. Phillips pronounces that Harriet, while completely innocent of knowing what she's actually doing, which seems to be sucking the energy out of people near her, is cursed. She's cursed with bad blood, bad hereditary, from her sadist father to her mixed-raced mother to also vampire blood added in there, which I almost feel like the vampire blood is just like, it's the supernatural part added to the racism, a little spice on top of the big slathering pit of racism to say why she's doing all this horrible stuff. But the thing is, even Margaret being innocent, she's way more innocent. She's way more interested in her love affair for when she doesn't know it, but one of her victims dies. She gives zero shit about that, and that kind of kills the character for me. It's like, oh, you're still just interested in this vain, ignorant asshole over there. You're not interested in this person that, unbeknownst to you, you've murdered. In the book's logic, yes, you've completely murdered her, and you not caring about that basically drove a wedge. It's like, I do not care about you. I do not care about you at all. You're a selfish asshole yourself. So yeah, it is very much that kind of a book. I think there's a critic that I really like who talked about horror movies. And he said the really great horror movies, they always have at the beginning kind of the setup of, okay, here are the people. And this is their interactions before we get to the horror part, because you want to set them up. And it's like a really great horror movie can set up people and their interactions and their personalities and make it so good that you like, if the horror part didn't happen, you could still have a movie with these really interesting and fascinating characters. And this book has none of that. I think about the characters in Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think about the women in that book and how well drawn they are and how interesting they are. Even some of the wet noodles in that book are far more interesting and far more active and thing. I think the only one who comes close in a weird S&M way is sort of the Baroness. She so delights in her cruelty, in her bullying, in her kind of her scheming ways. But I mean, she is so disdained by the book that that isn't the case. But there's just like a weird S&M kind of quality to her, which is sort of interesting. But she's like about it. Anthony Pennell is kind of interesting, but not to give anything away, but I find that like the conclusion of this book, you don't have the monster in this book. You have Harriet, who is a very passive creature who doesn't realize what she's doing. She's like kind of Plague Mary in a way, but she's just accidentally doing stuff to people, but there's no ill intent from her. It's all the bad blood, which I mean, I think is the other reason why it's such a drag getting through this book is because this book, at points I was like, oh, maybe the book doesn't believe what it's saying, that like it's evil, that we've commingled the races. I'm going to put races because, race science is bullshit. Races that's evil. And the result of that can only be evil. Even if the person themselves isn't evil. No, they're of bad blood. And I can see why this wasn't really a book that echoed through the ages, why it's something that now I can see why it it would be really it's interesting for people to say like, well, we had Dracula and The Blood of the Vampire in the same year, and let's like talk about them and compare them. I mean, the thing about Dracula is, yes, it's kind of trading on definitely kind of strong xenophobic kind of uneasiness with things like the New Woman, with things like, women having their own agency. Dracula's got all these different things going for it, and it's like, here comes Blood the Vampire, which is definitely trading on racist racial theory kind of stuff, but has characters that are just ciphers and stuff like that, and also really does seem to buy into it. Whereas a horror book has that thing of like, you can give the monster its own voice, and it can overpower maybe even what the author had thing. But it's like a rich text, and this is the Blood of the Vampire. To me, seems like this is the kind of thing. It's like, okay, and then you hold up this to show exactly how great something like Bram Stoker's Dracula was. So yeah, it was interesting. It was, but only on a kind of a sense of like thinking about Dracula, thinking about things outside of it. Inside of it, it is kind of a rather dreary drawing room melodrama with characters I didn't like. Blah. All right. So yes, that is the Blood of the Vampire. Which, yes, I found this online as the oh, can I find it? I found this online as the Yes, I found this online as the cover to show, because like it was the decent cover. But this show, like, this smoke show here, the atmosphere that this thing is putting off, completely wrong for the actual book. The actual book would just have a couple of people standing around bitching at each other, and people you didn't particularly like. This is the artist is like, oh, I've imagined a better book. This would be the better book if you could get it. There's like some intent there, and I mean, there is every once in a while in the description of the book. It's described, but then we just go back to Harriet being like, oh, I didn't realize. Whereas underneath, with all the bad blood, there's a smoldering, sensuous, evil mixed race woman that this book is pushing. And it's like, screw you. All right, I'm going to leave it there. More videos later.